Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Breakthrough. Today I'm here with Varti Deuchoghlian. He's an electronic music producer, mixing and mastering engineer with international touring experience. And these days he is focusing on producing and educating young producers full time. So welcome, Varti. I'm really happy to speak with you. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, man. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So let's get started with a little bit of background. Tell me what your journey was like as a musician and as a producer. What kind of experiences have you had that have led you to the point where you are today?
Yeah, the story is pretty, I would say, long, but overall, I started out in the rock metal world for many, many years. Played guitar for different bands, and parallel to me being, I would say, a metalhead, I really enjoyed rave music. And I used to go to late night clubs, listen to dance music, specifically house music, house trance. And while through time technology got easier in terms of producing music, I slowly started to get into learning different DAWs and producing dance music. One of my issues in the band world, which you might or might not relate to, as being a band member yourself of a band, I went through a lot of bands where a lot of the members weren't serious, at least not to the level that I was. I mean, some of them were. If anyone's listening, I was serious. Marty, what are you talking about? I mean, some of them weren't, at least not to the level that I wanted to make this my life. Um, I mean, family comes before everything for me, but next step is like, how do I engineer my life to live off music? And that's where I operated from, even as a band member, right? So I realized that I was kind of locked into relationships where I didn't have full control of me being to live my potential in music. And this is not to point fingers. It was just a way for me to rearrange myself. In electronic music, you can sit down and produce music yourself. You can even mix and master it if you have the talent and the education behind it, right? So slowly things led me to kind of steer towards dance music and taking more seriously in terms of a producer, in terms of songwriter. And naturally the bands I was part of died down. And that's how I got into it. And I got into it for many years. I left my job at a point and I started fully jumping into production. And that led me to, signing tracks to bigger labels, to playing shows, going to multiple conferences, touring, etc. And got to a point where I am today, where I went from an artist, which I still am, to being a service provider at the same time. At first, I was mixing and mastering for a living, and I was living off that. And then through that, I realized that a lot of producers that want their tracks mixed and mastered actually struggle in production. So a
Mm.
lot of my feedback as an engineer to them was, well, you got to fix XYZ in your track. That naturally bridged to me finding a love of wanting to teach people so they could so they could show up with their best potential in terms of fixing their tracks and getting proper tracks mixed and mastered. And now I do the education stuff predominantly. So that's kind of the journey in the last, I would say, 15 years, 20 years.
Cool. So it
Yeah.
all stemmed from the transition from band to electronic music was one of you have more control over your craft when you're working as a solo artist, I guess, right? And not being dependent on the rest of your bandmates for
Yeah.
other pieces of the puzzle. And I can relate to that. Fortunately for myself, I've been in all the bands that I've played with, I've it's been very rare that we've come to a situation where somebody wasn't serious in the band. Like I think I've been pretty lucky for that, but I have seen it happen a lot of times, countless times. Like there's bands don't stay together typically for that many years. Before even at the professional level, but I mean, up and coming bands is very, very challenging to get everybody on the same page. So tell me a little bit about how did you make that transition? Like, what were some of the first steps that you took when you realized, oh, there's some potential in the electronic music? Like, what was that transition point like for you?
Yeah. I mean, first off, I loved it, right? I didn't do it simply because the band thing wasn't working out. I was like, I actually loved it. And for me was while I was working in a corporate role that was in sales, and I was trying to manage my band, and we're trying to record our latest album back then. This is about like 11, 12 years ago. And on my free time at home, I had bought a desktop computer and I started fiddling around with Ableton. And naturally, the way Ableton is designed, it's very kind of conducive to writing loop-based, beat-based music, which in general dance music is, electronic music in general, right? So I started putting stuff together and I started getting into like the depth of as a guitarist, I'm like, well, if you can't play an instrument, you're not a musician. It's like a whole different planet. And I
Mm.
used to kind of judge, like, oh, this is easy to do, right? You put beats together and sounds together. And if you haven't seen that to the depth that it goes, it's fascinating how complex it is. At least to be able to compete in the industry in terms of creating music that's industry standard, right? Sound design, etc. And for me, that transition was beautiful because I went from technical minded artist as a guitarist, playing a lot of complex riffs as best as I could, to now switching over to carrying that technicality to a more computer based medium where like there's millions of knobs and you have to know what to do with it. And then even if you spend hours and hours and hours, it still sounds like shit. It's like, wow, this is really complex. That kind of sucked me into a world where I I found myself more and more in terms of like, wow, I could actually design my voice through this music without anyone else's influence. Not that that's not good, and we can talk about collaborations all day, but I needed that space for myself where I could actually kick back, press play, and eventually listen to a track that's complete. For us, a lot of time was while like other individuals in the band not being serious, it led me to start writing for these other individuals as well. Like I could write drums, but I'm not a drummer. I could write good drums, but I'm still not a drummer, right? There's nuances in terms of like a lot of micro hits, etc. So this allowed me to like go in a world where I still enjoyed. It's still music. It's still what I want to do. And the more I got into it, the more I realized like, wow, this is exactly what I want to do. And it was just so now that I'm kind of telling you the story and it's kind of like I'm putting the pieces together. I've never told it this way, but it is exactly what happened in terms of the flow of it. So that's how I got into it. I got Ableton, started fiddling around with it like anyone else. When you get stuck, you go to YouTube. Back then, YouTube wasn't very accessible, at least in terms of tutorials. Like over 10 years ago, it was, but
Right.
not like now.
Yeah.
You know, and one thing led to the other, and I left my job and fully jumped into it. Like I'm like, oh, I'm gonna make this work, no matter what, no matter what. And I had that conviction, and it just, I'm very. It was the biggest decision of my life, and we could talk about that as well. And it just took 10 years to be where I am today from that decision on. But that's how the first kind of leap happened in electronic music.
Let's actually talk about that more because I feel like that's a huge thing for a lot of people. I myself, I've been playing music for over a decade with my band and with various other people. And, I still have a full-time job and, I do other projects on the side, but it's a very scary thing to let go of that anchor, that stability of your full-time job to like plunge into your passion, right? And you did it. So what was that like? What did it take? What kind of headspace were you in when you decided this is what I'm going to do?
Yeah. We could talk an hour about that, but let me extract the main kind of leading factors to it. um, I did everything I was told to do. Went to school, got a degree in microbiology. I love science, by the way, and started working in the industry. And from working in a lab to then moving on to operations to then sales, I started making a lot of progress, a lot of money in the industry. When I say industry, I'm talking about the field I was in, science,
Mhm.
right? And I was really good at something I didn't care about. I was passionate about science per se, but I didn't like I enjoy sitting down reading a science book and really like a complicated one because I get it. I have a degree in it, right? But in terms of working in the field of it, it wasn't really what I was kind of into. That is why I moved on to sales very quickly because I was able to work with humans
Mm,
versus pipettes and beakers and
right.
right. So that brought me to a point where I was like, I found success through the corporate world, and I was making more money than I could spend. Not that I'm a big spender, but still, I was very comfortable, very, very, very comfortable. And I was like 28 at this point. And I told myself, one of the main thoughts that came to me was, you wake up every day, you do this, you know this is not you 100%, and you're doing this because of insecurities about finances. I'm talking about myself here,
Hmm.
right? I'm not talking about for the rest of the world to have a
But I
job.
think it's relatable to a lot of people, definitely.
Okay. I don't want anyone to be triggered on this, right? Like,
No, for sure.
it's like we all come from different backgrounds and different types of thought processes. But for me, it was more, I'm really good at something I don't give a shit about, you know? And why not transfer this love and this passion and this ability to something that I actually care about? And that was the first kind of like thought process of like, whoa, this like is so simple, but it makes extreme amount of sense. What are the obstacles? Finances, right? I mean, how can I cut down my expenses as much as possible? And I want places in my mind where people say you cannot cut XYZ expenses. And again, to each his own how they live their life. I'm like, I'm gonna live so much below my means where it's uncomfortable and I'm gonna save money. And I
Hmm.
did that for about like a year or so. And this allowed me to have a bit of a cushion. And I jumped into music. One of the emotional factors, aside from my need to produce music, was I had a girlfriend back then for about 5 years, and she was in a tragic accident. And she passed away. She always told me, like, you're wasting your life doing something just for money. And for me, the combination of all these things in my life, I just woke up one day. I'm like, you know what? Enough's enough. Like, I'm lying to myself. I know I'm not going to be happy if I continue this down this route, because making that high level amount of money and security, I got there. It didn't make me any happier. It didn't make me any more financially more secure than wherever I was making a lot of money. Yeah, I could spend a bit more carelessly now, but I'm like, it's all stuff I don't give a shit about,
Hmm.
like cars or even a house. Like, I don't care about buying a house at all. Zero. You know what I mean? Um, I removed myself from what are things that could get in my way in terms of me being able to leave my job and have a very difficult runway for the first couple of years. That helped. So there's I guess, on a business sense, everything is a business.
Yeah.
Our whole life is a business in a way. Um, I First there was the emotional factor of me wanting to do it. Then it was, how do we kind of close this gap and make it happen, like day to day, right? And not just keep it a up in the air type of dream to like let's look at the numbers, let's see how it's going to work. And I changed my life to make that happen as a starting point. And once I left my job, man, like I didn't make money for 2 years, like zero. I mean, $900 the first year, about, like nothing, right? Compared
Hmm.
to, and the savings I had were decent, but they weren't like people come to me and say, Vardy, I want to leave my job and I want the music, but I'm scared. I tell them how much you have in savings. They tell me numbers. I'm like, dude, you have 10 times more than I did. Like, yeah, but I have a family, I have kids. I'm like, okay, excuses. I had a lot of things too in my life, and then that I had reasons not to leave behind, right? And it just requires that massive amount of sacrifice. You're gonna have to want it so fucking bad that the alternative is misery, you know? So that's where I was mentally, and that's what allowed me to do the move, to step out and say, you know what, I'm gonna do it. So there was planning behind it. It wasn't random. It wasn't like me, young kid running around, trust fund baby. No, none of that.
Right. And you
You know?
said that you were already 28 when at that point when you had
Yeah,
decided.
28, yeah, 28, 29. I resigned right when I turned 29. I had a great relationship with my then boss, he was the owner of the company. I stuck around there for about 2.5 months to help them replace me,
Hmm.
because I had a great relationship with them, and he helped me out a lot when my ex passed away and I took like a month off. I was fully paid. So I said, you know what, I'm not gonna just walk away. Like, they've done so much for me and I want to see them succeed. So took a bit of a transition. By the age of 29, I was out. It was December. I don't remember the exact last date. It's weird. For me, the last date was October 27th when I did resign, when I said I'm going to resign. And from that point on, I'm like, everything in my life felt like made sense. It's like my whole life was building up for this moment. And I had
Wow.
no idea how I was going to find success in music. And there's immense amount of uncertainty. This is not me talking now, right? This is me talking back then where I made $0 off music. So
Right.
I just felt everything made sense because, like we we always use our intuition and our gut to protect us against stuff. You say, oh, this doesn't feel right, or this person's vibe is not the same. It's always like kind of defensive.
Hmm.
Like, and whenever we want to use our intuition in terms of, the lack of better way of explaining it, to set us truly free in terms of what we really want to do,
Hmm.
we start putting out like 10,000 walls in front of it. And that's why a lot of people aren't happy in life. And again, that's a whole can of worms, another 15 episodes we could talk about.
Definitely.
But I feel like if I hadn't done that move, I would not be happy. I would not be miserable, but I would not be happy.
It seems to be a theme that I've noticed with a lot of people who make big changes in their lives. It feels like, well, as you said, the dependence on money, first of all, like people feel very comfortable in their situations sometimes, and it's scary to let go of that and feel discomfort. But I think discomfort is in most cases what drives growth and development, right? So if you want to improve as a person in your career, in your job, you have to put yourself through some level of discomfort, right? Did going through that decision impact the way that your journey afterwards as a producer unfolded, that you had to kind of make that hard choice and change your life? And did that impact um the development of your career from that point forward?
Yes. Now, just kind of if we teleport back to where my headspace was when I left, I rather try this and fail than have never tried it. For me,
Yeah.
that was like, so wherever this leads me, I'm going to be okay with it
Hmm.
because I feel like I've won the lotto already, if that makes sense. Just having the courage to do it. You know what I mean? For me, that was like victory in itself. And whatever comes out of this is extra. So right off the bat, I let go of the millions of expectations that we put ourselves as musicians, however that looks like for you, right? So that was an important kind of headspace for me to be in. And I'm explaining it with a lot of clarity now because I could look back and
Hmm.
analyze. Back then, it wasn't necessarily this clear, but I had that foundational pillar inside of me. I was like, Varti, you did it. You left your job. It's crazy. And you're a full-time musician right now, making $0, but you are a full-time musician. You don't need to wake up tomorrow, right? So that transition and how I kept going forward mindset wise for me was, oh, I'm in a direction that I already love so much more from the first second. And I told myself, I have one thing to do. I just have to move towards this direction. Now, how I see direction and goals in life have vastly transformed right now. And part of the education that I do, I teach students how to do it properly because I learned over the last 10 years. And for me, it's like, as long as I keep on going in this direction where I'm putting all my focus into something that I love, something is bound to happen. And I just had that belief, right? Like we could look at like, when we look at religious stuff, like we talk about faith, whether you're religious or not, the concept of faith in a person, in an idea, in the universe, in whatever it is extremely powerful if we hyper focus on it, right? And for me, I believe that's what it was. It's like I told myself, like, you absolutely deserve this, but before it happens, you have to show it to yourself that you deserve it. And for me, step one was leaving my job. And I'm not saying that you have to leave your job to be able to live off music down the line. That was my story. And that's how the dialogue in my head with myself, right? So from that point on, like I've realized if I zoom out and kind of chunk out a piece, like the seasons of my life, everything I've done has been getting out of my comfort zone
Hmm.
to a point where right now, where I am at the level of mindset, which I would consider much higher than I was 10 years ago, I engineer discomfort in my life on purpose to a point where I sometimes question, like, am I normal to do this? But if you look back and if you have enough data of like the only things that have actually pushed me forward was me being in that headspace, right? Where things get comfortable and they feel good,
Yeah.
you're already behind. You know, I know it's weird because like we could talk about like being grateful and all that stuff, which is great, and I practice that regularly. But overall, like if I feel like 6 months go by and things are easy, like red flags start going on in my head, like what's going on?
Right.
You cannot be this comfortable.
Well, you asked the question like, am I normal? What is normal? Normal according to who? You know, like
Yeah.
we have to put everything into perspective, right? Because everybody's sense of normal is different. And you mentioned being grateful, which is super interesting because isn't there a sense of gratitude in having the opportunity to put yourself in a difficult situation? You know, it's like this isn't being thrust upon me. This isn't happening to me. I can choose to put myself in these situations because I'm in that position, right? Like
Yeah.
that's very different than having your back against the wall and having no choice. You know, you can put yourself in those positions.
100%. Like I agree 100% to that. Yeah, you said it perfectly. You know, like what I've realized is my happiness is fully 100% correlated to my freedom of choice. And a lot of times we all have freedom of choice.
Mhm.
All of us, at least in Canada. We're in Canada, you know, and I
Yeah.
want to talk about our lives, right? I don't want someone like on social media to say, "Yeah, well, Bertie, how about people in XYZ?" I'm like, dude, relax. Like, I can't speak for every human in this world. I could speak for myself and people with similar lifestyles. And it's we have the power to take decisions that shape our future. Like, we're not in wartime. My parents come from wartime. We know
Mhm.
what that feels like. It's really fucking crazy. Here, it's easy. Life's easy. The hard part is to do that, taking those decisions to get out of your comfort zone and allowing yourself to create a gap between the future person you will be because of that and the now person. For me, that gap is what we look back and develop gratitude on.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. And it's an exercise that we need to do regularly to look back and say, what are difficult decisions I've taken? What are the jumps I've done in my life? Right. And be grateful for that. And it's massive.
Absolutely. You mentioned that whether you failed or succeeded, that just making that choice was the reward for you.
Yeah.
Did you have an idea of like what would failure look like, and did you have a backup plan? What was or was it the type of thing where, some people say, you know, even if I had to live off of Campbell's soup for the rest of my life, I would just continue doing it forever and ever because this is what I love. Is that kind of like the position you were in, or did you have like an idea of if this doesn't work in X amount of time, I'll revert back to something more stable?
The Campbell soup idea, funny, there's two things, Campbell soup and plan B. Okay. Campbell soup idea you gave is a very musician type of mentality where we all know what we're talking about when we say that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Living in poverty. When I did leave my job to do music full time, I had no idea how it was going to pan out. Right? It's life. We might not be alive tomorrow. We don't know. Right? There's a lot of question marks, uncertainties. But I knew that with the faith thing, right? I knew that I was going to find success and I knew I was going to get financially comfortable. Why? Because I was financially comfortable doing something I didn't give a shit about. For me, like the energy of the world or whatever, it just doesn't work that way. You can't put that level of energy and trust and faith in something only to see it not pan out. It might take 10 times longer than you expect. And this is where people fall short because there's a lot of spiteful musicians that would even like listen to this and say, "Oh, you're just lucky." You know, that lucky bullshit. For me, it's like, dude, look at my life. Nothing. I was lucky nowhere. Nowhere. I've been beaten up everywhere from every single angle, nonstop, till this day. And I expect that to happen. What's the difference between me and you? I just haven't stopped.
Mm.
I have not stopped. And knowing that, that mindset got me success in the corporate world in a span of 10 years. If I give myself a runway of 10 years, odds are I'm going to get there by the end of like my late 30s. I'm 39 now. You know what I mean? So that's how I jumped into it. A lot of people told me, like, Vardy, you have so much like courage for doing this. I would never be able to do it. I said, if you're in my shoes, you would. You're just not in my shoes, and that's okay. If you want as bad as I wanted to, you would as well. Like, so for me, it's like, don't put me on a pedestal, far from it. And they said, you know what? It's okay though. Like, if it doesn't work out, like you always, you have a university degree, you have so much experience. I'm like, I don't give a shit about that. For me, plan B does not exist. For me, what plan B is? Unhappiness. You know what I mean? So for me, it was not a if because for you to say like I'm actually going in a direction I absolutely want to, but I want to have a plan B, right? It's like you're already thinking an immense amount of scarcity.
Mm.
You're thinking about finances not working out. You're thinking about you not being good enough, right? Those two things that are very easy to fix, very, very easy to fix, but we think it's the hardest thing in the world to fix. But it's all mindset. It's all stuff that I've learned. I did not have, like, if I had the maturity today, like 10 years ago when I left my job, first of all, leaving my job would be a joke. Second of all, I would be, I would go through less emotional or mental heartache through the process because it was difficult, right? But that's not fair to say. I cannot look at the result and say if I was there, you know what I mean? It's like
Right.
I am here because of that, right?
It
So
was difficult for you at the time because of the place that you were in your life and your own personal experience,
yeah,
right? And now you are more developed, so going through the same thing again would not be the same experience.
no, at all. Because you've done it before, right?
Yeah,
You've conquered the stage. It's like we're not gonna play the game again. Like we've done it already, right? So 100%. So originally your question was, well, actually, what stemmed from your question was the plan B thing, right? Like,
yeah,
and for me, that's like if you want to solve a massive problem in your life, because for me that's what it was. It's not like I wasn't grateful. I had a massive problem in my life. If I'm going to solve a massive problem in my life, I don't go in with option B, C, D, E, F. This is not an experiment I'm trying in my business. I'll see if the ads work.
hmm,
If not, it's okay. We'll go back to organic. No. This is like, there is no going back. You know what I mean? I told myself, unless life brings me to a point where I discover a new passion, that's fair game,
right.
right? And I have a big passion for business right now. And if I phase out in the future, produce a bit less music and focus a bit more on my business, that's okay because I want to.
Yeah,
It's not because I need the money or I want the money or et cetera, et cetera. By the way, side note, as artists, we look at business and money. We have an awful relationship with that. It's like one of the most creative things in the world is to run a business. As a highly creative artist, like seeing both sides, running a business is highly, extremely creative
hmm,
ever. So looking at like suits and saying, oh, these guys are like fucking square, they count dollars, like you have no idea what you're talking about. It's so not that. So if this kind of, you know, answers the question.
absolutely. I'll go back to the thing that you said about luck and people
Yeah.
discrediting and saying that you were lucky and whatever. And there's I think it's Wayne Gretzky, didn't he say that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take? So the more shots that you do take, the higher percentage chance that you'll land some of them. And some people interpret that as luck, and others interpret it as hard work. The harder you work, the luckier you get, right?
100%. Yeah. Students always ask me, like, Marty, I'm concerned taking my leap, whatever that is for them. It might be someone that's joining the mentorship, which is comes with a big investment, both time wise and resources wise. Like, this is going to work for me, right? Am I just going in a direction and wasting my life away? And I tell them, what's the alternative? Like, seriously, if the alternative was better, you would not be on this call with Varti trying to solve something in your life. It's that simple for me. Like, so this kind of like removes any fear of scarcity, any fear of like, what if it doesn't work out? What if it's just about luck? Yes, you could look at the Avicii's in this world, or you could look at the Metallicas in this world and all that stuff, right? And say, you know what, these guys are like monuments of and pillars of music and where music has brought us. And are you exactly going to be that? You might not even want to be that. You have no idea what it feels like being in their shoes. That's a whole different conversation of
Yeah.
vision and growth, right? And B, there's no purpose comparing yourself to those people and saying they were lucky, I'm not, because trust me, if you were in their shoes, you would not want their life. So right away, this luck thing is a comparison issue as well, where we compare ourselves, right? This is, of course, I'm talking about like first world countries where we have security, where we know no one's going to break down the door and like chop our head off, right?
Right.
Right. So we have a lot of like, we have this naturally kind of implanted comfort level, which, you know, allows us to have these conversations.
Yeah,
Start
which we
off with.
shouldn't take for granted either. I mean, that
No.
has to, it has to always be in the back of our mind. And it goes back to the gratitude thing that we were talking about before.
Yeah.
But
100%.
the issue of comparison, you know, like they also say that comparison is the thief of joy, right? And you can have an amazing career. I think is it, Dave Mustaine, all the interviews that I've seen about him, that people asking him about Metallica and all this, and him saying that he feels like he's a failure because he never lived up to the, or he never achieved the same amount of fame that Metallica did. Um, and that always struck me as sad, because some people have, they have it all but don't appreciate it because they've got their eyes fixed on somebody else doing something else. um you know, it just goes back to perspective. And I think it can be an issue in music. Everybody's measuring themselves up with something else, and we have the megastars that we're always exposed to, but then we also have these great bands and artists that have been doing it for years with medium levels of success, who are living an amazing life. They're doing what they love. And like, you know, somebody might say, oh, look, they're a failure. They've never played the Super Bowl halftime show. They've never won a Grammy. They've never done this and that. But like, there really shouldn't be any judging. As at the end of the day, I think this goes back to what you've been saying this whole time. As long as you're doing what you love, and something that's fulfilling to you, as cheesy as that can sound, that's winning, right?
100%. Yeah. 100%. Comparison is the worst thing, solely based on the fact that we have this one-sided view of what that looks like. And we completely engineer in our minds what it feels like being there. 100%. Like, let me give you an example, Rob. Like, students like hop on a call with me to try to see if like working together is the right thing and what the next step looks like. And I tell them like, well, what is that you want to like? Why are you on this call? You know, like
Mm-hmm.
let's just jump. I want to produce better music. That's great. And a big majority of them say that they want to be able to get their music to a point where it sounds professional for sake of like self-expression. And a lot of them through that want to make a living. When we start digging into that, a lot of it leads down to I want to be like XYZ, whether they say it or they don't. Right. And having been on stages where I've been emotionally almost crippled before going on stage and saying to myself, wow, like that's me, right? Like, I'm not enjoying this. This is not what we're touring. Like, I've toured in Asia and like a lot, and going through emotional depths of exhaustion, different culture, and like luggage is missing, which sounds simple, but when you're exhausted and you're stressing out for a show and your gear is missing, it's hell, right? You're going in with debt, hoping to collect that money to make money back. There's like layers of complexities that you show up to the show. They've completely neglected the tech writer. The gear isn't there because as DJs or electronic music performers, I mean, just like bands, right? You have kind of like the backline that's there.
Mm-hmm.
The gear is off. You flew for 2 days. You can't perform. They're not going to pay you. You can't sue them because you're in China. Right? Like that, I could pile up the amount of shit I've been through, and that's a portion of what, let's say, some people look at artists, right? That they look up to. It's like that's like a portion of what they go through, depending on the size of their business, etc.
Right.
And it's like when I tell us like they have no idea what they want, and part of it is okay because they haven't experienced it. part of it is very like very like single dimensional way of looking at something in terms of I see that person touring the world. That's cool. That ignites this feeling of success and fulfillment inside of me. I want that. And I will try everything I can to try that and to want that. And a couple of months in, a couple of years in, it doesn't work out. I quit, or you got to be lucky to be a music
Mm,
professional. I'm like, no, dude, you have no idea what they've gone through. And this whole comparison is flawed, and it's a tribal thing inside of us. And I don't want to be that person that I'm not a psychologist or I'm not, but like there's a tribalness into this of belonging together.
hmm.
And if someone in a tribe is a bit ahead of you, it's like, why can I not have that? And we realize through a lot of introspection that most things that we want are not things that we actually want. It's we've gone for things that we've seen a lot of other people around us succeed at, or some people around us succeed at, and it's like, oh, I want that. And then you spend so much energy fulfilling something that wasn't initially your initial desire. And that's where it kills people mentally, you know?
Right.
So
You see the image of something and you don't realize all the baggage and everything that happens
yeah,
in the background. I want to
100%.
talk a little bit more about your touring experience because you mentioned that you've toured Asia, and obviously there were a lot of challenges associated with that, which I imagine is part of the reason why you're not doing that anymore and focusing more on the producing side. But tell me about some of your experiences touring, especially being on the other side of the world, experiencing different cultures. Like, what were some of your big takeaways from that? How did that impact you?
In my in my 20s, I struggled a lot with anxiety, generalized. I did not know what the fuck was wrong with me. Maybe it was the big leap of leaving financial security and figuring stuff out. It might be a combination of that mixed with my parents have left a war-torn country. I was born here, but I went there, Lebanon, bombs falling. I've been around that. So like it might be
Hmm.
that has built up through, I don't know. And it might be a bit of my personality where I try to get too much done in a small amount of window. Combination of all these things maybe leads to, I don't know. But what I'm getting at is I've gone through that experience, and having toured through that, I it made it particularly difficult. It added the weight on top of my shoulder emotionally in terms of it's just not about like traveling and playing shows now. It's like aside from everything else, you got to deal with the operations of the tour. Now you're emotionally there's instability places, and I feel like whenever I've traveled, whether it's been through like long-winded type of travels or touring travel, I figure out a lot about myself. And I say this because you end up in a situation where you're highly out of your comfort zone, especially where somewhere no one speaks English,
Hmm.
where the food's different, you get homesick, you want to talk English to someone, it's been 4 days you haven't, aside from hi, my name is,
Hmm.
and I feel like it has developed a lot of the understanding of who I am as a person, being away from the comfort of family. Again, kind of plays in with the comfort zone stuff, right? So touring differently, more heavily than just vacationing somewhere far away, right? Touring has had the added element of like, well, you're here to perform, and you're getting paid. It is what you love, but there is responsibility. We're not going to the beach, and you got to show up. You got to make sure you're not making mistakes, and you got to show up you got to show up like properly. You came from the other side of the world. They're expecting like a good performance. There's layers of complexities mentally that weighed on me, but I feel like it made me who I am today in terms of dealing with that emotional weight and having gone through it. Now, culture shock was a big thing. Learning new languages. I predominantly toured in China, um, and learning Mandarin was exciting and highly difficult
I
because
can
I wanted to
imagine.
connect. Yeah, because as a human, like introvert, extrovert, whatever you are, when you're in an environment, a new environment, there's this intrinsic need in you to want to connect with humans. But the fact that you cannot even communicate, it's like for me, I've always felt that's a problem,
Mm.
and that's why I want to learn language. So learning language was an added kind of experience. it was great. Touring was great. Touring made me realize that a lot of what we see on social media about the best pictures and the best, everything, is all fucking fake. It's like 5-10% of the experience, which is powerful. And that's what keeps us going. But the remaining of it is quite complex and not always pleasant.
Yeah, it's the Instagram photo in front of the crowd of 20,000 people
Yeah,
that your friends see that make them think, "Oh my God, he's living this
the
amazing
dream.
life."
Yeah.
And it is a great experience, right? To a certain degree, but there's a lot more to it than that, I would assume, or from
Oh,
what
yeah.
you've been saying. Um, what was like what were the positive takeaways from being able to tour in such a such a different location? Like there must have been uh like going back to the gratitude thing, like it's an experience that not a lot of people get to have. So like what were some of the positive takeaways?
Relationships, a lot of new relationships with very different people.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big one. When you start playing shows more regularly and more when you're touring, you have shows that are more closely spaced out. And for me, I've only really played shows that close to each other when I was away. And you get into this trance, which is amazing. It's a great feeling to be in, and you'd be like, now I'm a professional touring musician or producer, whatever it is, right? Depending on genre. So for me, that there's that fulfillment that came out of it, the connections and the network, um, the cultures that I came across. And at the same time, one of the biggest positive from all the touring experience, aside from the partying and the fun stuff, the typical stuff that we all know that we don't need to explain, is the appreciation of missing the people back home.
Mm.
And I've traveled a lot. Like I've lived in South Korea for a year. I was teaching English when I was 23. I've been in Japan like many times. So it's like I've traveled far away a lot. But the touring made me really realize that this is something that I enjoy. It's not something I want to do for the rest of my life. And I miss the people closest to me, which is something very simple. And like, did you have to go touring and go to the other side of the world to realize that? I guess I did. And that was a massive positive, aside from the typical positive of actually the show and the fans and all that stuff.
Right, that makes so much sense. It's and it's a very extreme example, but I think it's normal, and it's definitely good to miss the ones that you love. It's healthy, and it makes you appreciate those relationships even more.
Yep. 100%.
Um, so something else that I was interested in talking to you about is because you have a background in like rock and metal, and you're working in EDM right now. Like my realm is more of the rock, band realm, but I know a lot of electronic producers as well, and I've always been kind of interested in the differences, like comparing and contrasting the rock scene and the electronic scene, because I do see some differences, some similarities, but there are a lot of differences too. And one that's to me is very noticeable is the amount of collaboration that happens in electronic music between producers and between artists. Um, much more so than you see in the rock world, where it's you know everybody's against each other, like we're rival bands, we're fighting for attention, this and that. Not a whole lot of crossover, not a whole lot of collaboration. But in electronic music, it's everywhere. Everybody's collaborating with everybody. There's so many features here and there. To me, that's a huge difference between the two that I can spot. um, do you have anything to add to that, or are there any other similarities and differences that you've noticed in your career, working in both different genres?
Yeah, collaboration is something that's different, but that can be fixed. Not that it's a problem, it can be fixed. Just be that person that goes and just, collaborates with other guitar players and get
Mm-hmm.
them to do riffs on your next album and get singers kind of, teaming up with Brandon and whatever. It's we have this macho-ness of like, no, no, we got this, we got this. It's like, dude, relax. Like you don't got this.
Mm-hmm.
Get people in. There's so much juice outside that could transform who you are as a human. electronic music producers have seen a lot of success through remixes, collaborations, and piggybacking on fan bases, that it's become part of the culture. If we go very, very deep in history, I would not know, because I'm a recently newer electronic music producer. I've been in it for about a bit more than a decade. There's guys I've been in for like 4 decades.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I don't know how collaborations were back then. So collaboration could definitely be like transformed in the rock scene, metal scene 100% if we just let go of the ego. And it's very possible. He could be the first one to jump in and do that, you know? But in terms of differences, like the fact that most electronic music producers wear multiple hats, that's also starting to transform in band-based music, where you see like some guys like writing all the instruments, mixing and mastering, everything, right?
Mhm.
That's possible. That's common too. But in electronic music, pretty much everyone that's producing is producing, mixing, mastering all at the same time, and they don't even know the difference. Is the nature of it, where a lot of times you don't need to play an instrument and the computer does some of the work for us. So we start diverting our attention more on sound design, instrumentation, kind of orchestrating the whole piece. Naturally, that ties into, why isn't my mix sounding not good? But your problem is not your mix, it's actually your instrumentation. And all that muddies up into us wearing multiple hats. In the band world, while that might exist, it's much less common. Like you play an instrument, you team up with other guys that play different instruments, together you guys play a song.
Mhm.
You show up, you got the tracking engineer, the mixing engineer, a lot of times, right? And then you send the track out for mastering, and the album's done. So I feel like there's more in general, more of a focus as an instrumentalist, especially if let's say you're just a guitarist, right? You just play the guitar, that's the craft that you get good at, and you start writing songs with it. That's your role in the project. In the electronic scene, we take on everything.
Mhm.
It's good and bad. Now there's a whole movement of integrating a lot of organic composition in electronic music, where guys are starting to integrate their instruments in their music a bit more, making it less perfect to get more breadth and more freshness in the music, right? So there's that transition happening now. Collaborations help with that too. You might get a guitar player that might come in, do a piece, a part, and then use it as a layer, right? I feel that's a big difference. Like when you go in Facebook groups, and I'm in a lot of Facebook groups, I'm in Facebook groups where I post a lot of content where, let's say the group's called music producers. It doesn't specify like there's rockers there, there's everything there.
Right.
And whenever I do an electronic music post, like sometimes I get, like guys kind of like, what do you mean mixing? You're a producer, what are you? Right? It's like, well, that's how the electronic world works. Like it's everything is kind of put in together predominantly because of technology and everything being much more accessible, right? We don't need massive amount of like outboard gear, etc. That's a difference. The singles versus the albums. Well, I wouldn't say single, because I mean, even in rock music, you could do singles and release it. That's more of a streaming service type of Spotify being released. That was a big thing that played a role in that.
Yeah.
But I would say, I don't know if you could correct me on this, but for a while as a band, you signed the track to a label. You actually signed the band to the label. In electronic music, we sign a track to a label.
Okay.
You don't sign, you can do a 360 deal, or you can do a deal where as an artist, you're signed to a label and you have a specific contract for it. But like 95% of the time, let's say I have 10 tracks, I could sign to 10 different labels. Right. So that's a clear cut difference between rock, metal, and dance music, unless in the last 5, 6 years, the band world has caught up to that.
It may have. I don't know. I haven't experienced that, but
Okay.
I have dealt with, and I've never had a good experience with a record label either. That's only having worked with like smaller independent ones, but it's never been a good one. So I think
Yeah.
it seems like more of a healthy relationship when you can just license one song instead of like giving your entire soul and your
Yeah.
house and your everything over to this label. It's and then they just have like everything hangs on them afterwards. But the flexibility in the electronic scene is a big one, it seems. And then another
Yeah.
thing is, the online aspect of it and the community surrounding a lot of electronic producers, I feel like there's a lot of support. You know, am I wrong, or am I just like misinterpreting that as kind of like the local band guy who's like been around for 10, 12 years and like seen a lot of fans come and go, but like in the electronic scene I see a lot of people who have like these very dedicated groups, like their Discord servers like behind them and everything. And is it easier to generate an audience in that realm than it is in rock music?
Mm, I'd be in a better position to answer this question if I was in a rock band as well,
Hmm.
be able to properly contrast. But I feel like we always forget one side of the equation. Like there is a lot and a lot of electronic music producers too, right? So there's so much music being released, and there's almost no barrier into what you produce these days and the quality of it and release it. You could actually, someone could like buy a computer today, get Ableton, write a beat for 2 minutes, export it, upload it on DistroKid, and it's out tomorrow,
Hmm.
right? So it's like it's massive amount of like accessibility and speed. So as the communities are there, and that might be helpful, whether it's education, whether it's fan base, etc. I feel like there's a lot of noise, which kind of counterbalances that. And what you're seeing in electronic music could fully comfortably be created in the rock and metal scene more and more. You just need that person to learn from another industry and mimic it, you know? And I feel like it's that simple. Is that what you meant? Like in terms of support, in terms of fan base, or in terms of like the community of artists that come together and learn from each other, etc.?
Yeah, I meant more in terms of fan base, not so much the community of artists, but yeah, the fan base and the support that the fans give to. I mean, I know it's there for rock music too. At the larger end of the spectrum, like
Yeah.
there's a lot of big bands that are still getting like tons of support in their tours and their merch and everything, but like at the grassroots level, you see it less and less. And maybe it's because of the events of the past few years where we've had less concerts, less shows, and that's been kind of where most of the rock and metal scene has thrived. Traditionally, it's been like the concert venues, right? um so yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a question here. I'm just trying to kind of formulate it as I go. But like with the disappearance or reduction of the live music over the past few years, it's been hard for rock bands to kind of generate the same kind of like community engagement. I feel, at least that's where I'm coming from on my end.
Yeah. But on the fan base side, it's still hard
Yeah.
on for electronic artists to build that, right? You need amazing music released on good labels. What helps these artists though is if I write a song that's good enough and that's in the vein of XYZ label, and they have a massive support, like literally overnight, if I have, let's say, a lot of experience, like writing amazing music, I start a new brand, send it off, that label signs it, they've had the connections. And you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
fans start rolling in. I'm simplifying a very complex process here,
I've
but
seen
to
it
the
happen though. I know
yeah,
exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, it's true.
100%. Yeah.
Like
I
overnight, an
produce,
overnight thing.
yeah. I mean, I produce music under an alias that it's not, I don't promote that it's me. So no one knows it's me. So, but it's me running the show. It's not like I'm being ghost producer, I'm ghost producing. It's just you don't see my face. No one knows it's me. So I had zero social media and I sent it to a big label in the UK and they signed it. It's like, and then I started my Instagram profile with that level of kind of like backing.
That's pretty cool. And
Yeah.
and yeah, that's a big difference, I think. It's because as a band, the first question anybody asks you is how many followers do you have? Like show me your social media links and
Yeah. It's old
everything.
school. Yeah.
It's old
I get
school.
it. I get it. It's because see, like when the labels they're investing in you as a project, they want to see that it's working versus building you up. That
Mhm.
is also important in electronic music. If you go to a label and you have like millions of followers, odds are the label is going to be skewed to want to sign it if the music's good versus someone else who, you know what I mean? So
Right.
that does play a role in electronic music too, but there's less of that because in the rock world, we're monetizing the project as a band and we're trying to look at it a longer runway. In electronic music, it's like, let me sign as many amazing music as I can as a label to build a brand around that. which is another problem, which that's great, but comes up with like segmented labels with specific sounds. And when your sound doesn't fit in any one of those, you're homeless. That's a
Okay.
problem with electronic music. So
Interesting.
yeah,
Oh wow. I never thought of it that way, but it is true. And I wonder, I mean, there's probably advantages and disadvantages to both of those things, but
100%.
I would love for somebody to create a label that just signs rock or metal songs, like from not the entire band, but just like, oh, you made an amazing piece of music. I really like this. I can distribute this for you or do whatever. Like I have
Yeah.
connections, that type of thing. I think that's needed probably.
Yeah. And maybe there are, but yeah, it's just a different thought process,
Yeah.
right?
We've been
Yeah.
at this for almost an hour. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I just wanted to kind of circle back to the what you're doing now, the education thing,
Yeah.
because I'm really interested in that, and it's kind of what led me to you or led me back to you in the first place, was seeing the content that you post for up and coming producers on your social media. A lot of videos that deal with the things that I'm interested in talking about, which is kind of like how do you deal with uncertainty, what is the mindset that you have to be successful, and when you're developing and creating. So the first thing I'll ask is, what made you realize that you wanted to teach and share your experience with people as kind of an evolution of your career?
I was always frustrated at the fact that there's a lot of YouTube nonsense where I'm like, yeah, but you're not explaining anything, dude. And I used to hate feeling that, and I did not want to be. And I want once things made sense to like a high level in my head, I felt like I needed to pass on that information in a proper way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying I'm the only person, but this is a big problem on YouTube, right? So some things aren't properly explained, and that was one of them. Number two, when I was 23, I told you I lived in Korea. I was teaching English, so I developed like the excitement of teaching and passing on information. And most importantly, right now, if I look at my vision for my future, I always tell myself the level of experience and information I have, if I keep it to me, to myself, it only serves me. It can indirectly serve the world if I pioneer music, for example, and then I have millions of fans and people
Mm-hmm.
say, oh, Varti, I started producing music because of your music was so amazing, right? Whatever. Yeah, fair enough. But today, tomorrow, the next day, next week, next month, I believe instead of this knowledge that I have that I've built over the years serving me, instead of only serving me, it could serve the world if I share it. So my drive comes from that point of wanting to share and see producers excel, grow, develop their vision, and get closer to it and hit it. So that's how I decided and why I decided to do it.
Is there a key thing that you notice a lot of young people misunderstanding or getting wrong, that you like have to that you can guide them in the right direction? Like, is there a common mistake that people are making in your experience?
Yeah. 90% of producers, when asked the question, what do you struggle with? They say, I struggle with my mix. I wish I could mix better. It's absolutely not the case. They're not struggling with their mix. They're struggling with writing better music from all levels of production standpoint. So, like, to a point where it's like, it's a broken record. The amount of people I talk to is like, Marty, if I could mix better, I could be signed to be. No, no, you would not be signed to a better label if you mix better because your problem is not in your mix. Let's go to the source and identify what your problem is. And then, boom, like, you see them like skyrocket in terms of like skill set, you know? So that's the main issue. They think they have a problem in mixing, but it's not mixing the problem. It's their music,
Comes
their
down to
production,
composition and writing more than
composition,
anything.
storytelling, sound design. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. What does it take to make it as a sustainable artist now in 2023? Like, what is, if you could boil it down to like the three most important qualities to have?
Yeah. A highly detailed vision of where you're going and what that looks like, not just goals, like a detailed vision, how that looks like, that feels like. Consistent work. I say consistent, like I usually ask producers to produce 10 to 12 hours a week minimum and map out a long runway. Like you're not going to get the success tomorrow or next year or next 3, 4 years. We're looking at the next 10 years. That's number two. Number three, as much as possible, surrounding yourselves with people that have gone there. So guys like me or other people in their lives that are way ahead of them. If you have people around you every day that are ahead of you, that's awesome. Learn from them every day. If you don't have that ecosystem, join one. So these two things: vision, consistent effort, and guidance. No
Great.
doubt you'll find success. It'll just take time.
Amazing. That's great words of advice. I'm gonna leave you with one last question. From what I've seen, you're a dad now. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I also had a baby this year, and it's
Wow.
well, it's my second one, but
Wow.
just as
Congrats.
special as the first one. But my question was, how has becoming a father changed your approach to your career and I guess your life in general?
Just slowing things down in my
Mm.
mind, slowing things down and appreciating every moment I have with him, realizing that anything and everything we're going after, who gives a shit if it takes another year or two? And it has slowed down for me to be able to be in the present moment. As much as I say that, I struggle with it daily, but it has helped me a lot in terms of how about you?
You know what? I would have to say the same thing and agree on the point that I struggle with it a lot because I always want to go 100 miles an hour, but it is important to slow down. And it's thank you for that reminder actually because it's so true. And with kids, you have to savor every moment because they like another cliche like they grow up so fast. You know,
Yeah.
it's so true that when they say the days are long but the years are short, you might feel like it's a struggle from day to day because your lifestyle changes so much when you have kids. Like you have limitations, you can't live the same way you did before, and it can be hard for some people who are used to having that kind of like freedom. And for me it's just kind of acknowledging that this is where I am now in my life. It's not going to last forever, so just appreciate it for what it is while it's here, and that's basically it.
100%, man.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Cool, man. I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you speaking with me. This is a great conversation. I love speaking to other music people. I find it so great. So thanks. I hope you can join me again in the future, and good luck with your teaching and with your music and everything. Wish you all the best, and the family too.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. It's been super fun. I love talking about deep stuff and music all combined.
All right. It was great. Thanks a lot.